Hello and welcome to this week's episode of our Wisdom Wednesday from the Alter Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Susanna Alter.
And I'm Dr. Ben.
And we're both naturopathic doctors who empower individuals to heal themselves with whole food, plant-based nutrition and mind-body medicine.
So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. And this is going to be all about what we can do, we being like me and Susanna, but maybe also you, to break the cycle of judgment. And let's talk about what that is. Let's talk about, I don't know. I don't think we need to give any backstory or anything like that, because I think we all have the experience, probably to some degree, pretty fresh in our own lives. Some example of maybe someone hurt our feelings. So we felt a little bit hurt, and then we kind of said something that, reciprocated the hurt, and then they felt hurt. And to whatever degree, that sort of back and forth cycle is and has been perpetually repeating since the dawn of time. And I think that that's helpful to know. But at the same time, it's also maybe helpful and inspiring to consider that we don't have to perpetuate that futile cycle ad infinity into the future. And we can, in fact, put an end to it here and now by declaring our own well-being and sovereignty and freedom. And in so doing, I think that we all have that potential and opportunity to just separate from that cycle that's so heavy and so difficult. That being said, it is so difficult to separate from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the way to really separate from the cycle is to really understand what the cycle is and what creates and perpetuates the cycle. Um, it's really interesting. I just want to speak personally real quickly, because in this kind of example where maybe we were on the receiving end of kind of a hurtful experience and we feel hurtful, it's one thing. Yes, you were saying it can be an easy tendency to kind of reciprocate in that hurt, like, oh, well, that person is just stupid, or that person is just ignorant, or that person is just whatever, and kind of and maybe we act out and speak from that place of judgment. But I also want to talk about a circumstance where, there might be even a little more a subtle kind of tone of judgment, where it's almost like a more enlightened place of judgment, like, oh, well, yes, I know that person is just doing the best they can with what they've got, but I'm going to be the better person still,
Yeah.
and not do anything. And even in that place, there's this hint of judgment of, I'm better, they're wrong, I'm right, and the cycle persists.
Exactly. I'm glad that you're bringing up those more nuanced topics, because that's really where we're at in today's world. It's like there's this righteousness, and whether it's the people who are awake versus the people who are asleep, whether it's the lions who are courageous versus the sheeps who are just following orders, whether it's the right and the left and the up and the down and the vegans and the carnivores. And there is always, and will always be, two sides, two tribes. Of course, there are many more than two, but there will always be tribalism. There will always be sides. And it's so helpful and important to identify with the unifying force from which all things are inspired, from which all ideas come. And that is our divinity. That is our true nature. And I think the more we can identify with that soul essence of ourselves, and the more we can see that in others, regardless of the forms and shapes and flavors that it takes, because, oh boy, I think we all know that the human expression takes on many forms and flavors, and a lot of it is hard to swallow and hard to, like, it's like, wow, is that person really a part of my human species? But yes, they are. Yes, they are. And I think, in more of like a spiritual, metaphysical context, I think that the more fragmentation, for lack of a better word, the more like dispersed, like craziness that happens, the more wild that humanity gets and expresses, our like our colors in all sorts of ways, the more opportunity we have for unconditional love, compassion, appreciation, respect, and tolerance. And like, period. And that doesn't mean that we tolerate just that which we are able to. It means we stretch the boundaries of our tolerance. And that, like you were saying, Susanna, it doesn't mean that we do so with snubness, even though snubness, and that, is that the word, snug, but like, like it's just that kind of air that, okay, well, I tolerate it, but I know I'm better.
Mhm.
I tolerate that stuff. I tolerate people who just eat animals, but I know that, plant-based eating is the best. And yes, I'm human, and that is actually my thought process. I do tolerate them, but also I acknowledge that thought process. I acknowledge that feeling of righteousness, and I deepen into it and consider the embrace and appreciation and the unconditional respect and admiration for the colors in which humanity comes into form. And I think that there's like this idealism where we do have the potential to totally dissolve any sort of judgmental thinking. But at the same time, the reality is most of us, most of the time, are engaged in judgmental thinking. And we can see that judgmental thinking for what it is, just kind of, you know, energy, noise, just formless stuff flying through us. And we can recognize that that's not us. That's
Mhm.
just coming through us. And we are something bigger, deeper, greater. And, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, where I wanna kinda jump in is, like, we were talking about how when we really understand what the judgment cycle is and where it comes from, then we can, break free from it a little bit more. But I think the first thing to understand is that human beings are judging beings because we live in this understanding and this reality of duality where things are either good or bad. Everything, like in every moment, like I'm hungry, ooh, that's bad, or it's raining, oh, that's good because I didn't want to go outside today, or whatever. We're so easy to judge whether something is good or something is bad, or whether we agree or whether we don't. And that is human nature, whether whether we want it to be or not. That's the nature of the thinking mind. And so to kind of have this ideal expectation that we're going to stop judging altogether,
Mhm.
it's not realistic, right? But if we understand that, that's where all people are kind of operating from, we see how it really is just part of like human nature, and how some people form really strong beliefs about what is good and what is bad, or what is right and what is wrong. And every single person has their own unique reality that is made up of those beliefs and those thoughts. And that's where people operate from.
Yeah.
And that's really what judgment is it's just thoughts
Mhm.
that we assign value to and that we buy into and take seriously.
I feel like we could talk about this forever. I feel like we could talk about the human nature of judgment forever. Um, and I want to also bring up just this other really important concept that's coming to the forefront of my thinking right now, which is also the idea of, okay, in any scenario, there's two parties, right? There's the judged and the judger, right? and there's there, what if you want to look at it that way, but there's two parties to any relationship, and we're all responsible for our internal experience. We cannot in any way ever control the apparent other in any relationship. We can do our best to appease them. We can placate to their needs. We can be nice. We can be tolerant. We can be respectful. But at some point, we have to acknowledge that we're doing our best and they're doing their best, and they might still feel judged. They might still feel criticized. They might still feel disrespected or hated. They might still feel and perpetuate that kind of suffering and that separation. And that's not our responsibility to bring them into the space of unity, right? And I realize that when I'm even talking about this now, like, of course, I'm using the me and the them and the us and the them, and maybe it even sounds like, oh, well, I'm more awake and enlightened because I recognize this, and they're not. But the fact is, they are awake and enlightened. Everyone is awake and enlightened. It's just to what degree they're operating and recognizing their enlightenment. And I forget, you forget, we all forget. It sounds like a song. I forget, you forget, we all forget, but we do all forget, and we are all remembering. And so I guess I just wanted to bring up that idea of, like, just taking responsibility for what's going on inside, because that's within our control. And we're never going to be perfect in our human expression. We're never going to say the quote unquote right thing all the time. We're never going to be the nicest that we can be, but that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to be authentic, aligned, and true to the energy that's flowing through us. And sometimes it's really messy, and then that mess gets spewed across the internet, spewed across the dinner table, or in any other way meet someone else in relationship, and they might be offended. And then there's that opportunity to work things out and seek and find and be in that common ground and unified field, and every taking advantage of every opportunity to come together, despite the perceived separateness, is what we need to do.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think, when we go back to this, if there was a how-to of how to break the judgment cycle, first we understand what perpetuates the judgment cycle, right? We've talked about what judgments are. But really, going back to something you said earlier, Ben, when we identify not with our thinking mind, not with our story, not with our right and wrong judgments, but we identify with our true nature, our soul, our infinite wisdom, our infinite joy and peace of who we are in our core. And we also identify with others as that same essence, despite
we see
we
that
see them as that.
essence, that reflection in the perceived other.
Right. It doesn't matter what they're saying. It doesn't matter what they think about you. It doesn't matter nothing matters. None of the superficial thinking stuff matters, because you see the true essence of that other person. You have that true namaste experience where you see the divinity in someone else, and you see the perfection of the entire interaction or whatever it is. You see it on a deeper spiritual level. And you see in that moment, there's nothing to judge. There's nothing wrong about what's happening in that present moment.
Yeah, it's like waking up from a movie or a dream. Or I guess you don't wake up from a movie, but you see that you're in a movie. You see that you're in a movie, and it's like, oh, this is really a dramatic thing. And I can literally, like, press pause. I can literally be that much in control of my experience, where I just disengage, if only for a microsecond, to reevaluate how I'm interplaying and in relating with what's going on in and around me.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think in that moment, I mean, what distinguishes that kind of feeling from that kind of fake acceptance or fake tolerance or whatever is that you actually see the other person as the same as yourself. You see that you are the same. You see that you're connected. You see that you're on completely equal playing fields.
Yeah, you
There's not this self hierarchy still of I'm more awake or I'm this or I'm that, I'm better. You see that you're the same as the other person.
And I think that there's also an appreciation of the innocence of, the self innocence of me doing my best, and the innocence of that other person, of them doing their best. And of course, sometimes it is fake. Sometimes it's not real. Sometimes we are just faking it. And we know that and we feel that, just like when someone says, I'm sorry to you, and it's like, that person's not really sorry. That person's just opened up their mouth and the words I'm sorry came out. They're not, that doesn't mean that they're sorry. It's like we all have the knowing and the resonance and the ability to attune to that level of truth. And that's not to say that we need to or can in any and all moments, but we can at least orient ourselves in that direction and be guided by that force for good.
Mhm.
That so yeah, I like that you are breaking this down of the steps of how to break the judgment cycle.
Well, and I also want to share an experience I had real quickly recently, a recent experience where I was responding to a situation thinking that I was coming from a loving and grounded and accepting place. I was essentially still kind of looking down at this other community, like my tribe is more informed and better than your tribe or whatever. And it was a really humbling experience to realize that actually I was still very much in a judgmental place, that I wasn't as centered and grounded as I thought I was. Yeah, I just want to speak to that kind of that humbling feeling that just washed over me, because in the moment when I really did see, like, oh wow, like the people in that group that I separated myself from, when I really saw that we are all made up of the same stuff and we are all made up of this amazing divine stuff. Um, there's this moment I had where then I judged myself, like, Susanna, how could you even think that you were any better than these people? So then I had to let myself off the hook for, of course, being human and having a thinking mind that has a tendency to judge.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's maybe one of the biggest take-home messages I know for me is to, have this vision of the idealism of the utopia, we are one, have this knowing, and have the space for the messiness of my own human experience. But always, it's like this kind of force field, this magnet that's like, okay, I'm going to like go around and be a mess. But there's this gravity that brings me back to the truth, the capital T truth, which is the unity and that fact that I am this soul essence in human form, doing my best. And I can see and recognize that in all reflections, in all relationships. And it sounds kind of hard to practicalize that, hard to bring that into physical world reality practice. But at the same time, it's not, because it's there. And it's like there's this force. I feel it. I feel it like all the time. I don't always recognize that feeling, but whenever I want to, I do. Whenever I whenever I allow myself to do, I do. And I can be guided by that. So of course, as always, these kind of things are hard to put words on and talk about. But if you are resonating and feeling it, feel free to drop any feedback. Let us know how you are doing with breaking judgment cycles in your world. I know that humanity at large is ready for the new earth, in which a space in which these judgment cycles are not guiding forces, but just, fading into the background, because the guiding forces are the forces for good. And I feel that we are collectively moving there. And the way to do so, I think, is bringing that level of awareness, that level of compassion for ourselves, for others, for the world at large. And we appreciate you for tuning in and doing your part.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you are guided to these weekly Wisdom Wednesday calls and you want more, please know that we do have our weekly Peace on Earth program, where we meet in a weekly Zoom call and we dive into these topics in much greater depth. And you can join on a sliding scale for as little as $25 a month. So to learn more about that, go to alter.health, and we'll see you next week for another Wisdom Wednesday.
Peace and love, you guys.
Bye for now.